Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm a 40-year-old dad from Scotland. I'm introducing my new, very amateurish YouTube channel about a little boat that I'm building and will eventually sail. I started the boat before thinking about having a channel, so this first video will be a bit of a slideshow type thing to briefly catch up on where we're up to, and then there'll be short videos made going forwards from that point. I grew up, I suppose, mostly thinking that I wanted to fly. But after getting off to a promising start, there was a bit of a change of direction, some family commitments, and a desk job type career. And I'm at the point now where I'm too old to gain the experience needed to safely fly the type of aircraft that I'm interested in flying, and far too poor to afford to fly the type of aircraft I'm interested in. The sort of thing that I could afford to fly probably doesn't appeal to me for a number of interlinked reasons. Around 11 years ago, I had my first sailing experience on a small boat, and whilst I won't try and rank it against flying aeroplanes, I will say I enjoyed it very much. And there was some crossover with another interest of mine in the form of classic sailing vessels. Not long after this, I discovered Campion Sail and Design's website and was immediately drawn to the pretty Apple 16 design in particular in the cutter rig. Boat building in wood is a vast subject with lots of hard-earned skills, expensive tools, and not least a lot of very expensive top-quality materials required. Or the Apple 16 might have changed my perception somewhat on that. Looking through the designer's website, I discovered the very user-friendly approach that this design takes. Sure, it's not a traditional plank-on-frame hull built around moulds, but it's still wood, which is easy to work with, but it's made from modest quantities of relatively affordable marine plywood and some Douglas fir, Iroko, things like that. It is cleverly designed to be quite efficient with the materials and uses an assembly technique that avoids the need for proportionally quite expensive and time-consuming jigs and moulds. This design of boat is stitched together with plastic tie wraps or twisted wire, and then it's fiberglass taped together. I could do this in principle. And whilst I've got a lot of experience in fine scale and radio-controlled model making and many materials from plans and drawings, building big stuff in wood wasn't something at the time that I was equipped for, either in terms of time or tools or even just a workspace. So unfortunately the idea was shelved for a while, although I never really forgot about it. My children arrived about the same time, but they're now of an age where they're not completely useless. But they are still impressionable and starting to form interests of their own. Now, I'm not the sort of parent to want to try and force anything upon them, but I would like to introduce them to a number of different things, which might help consolidate their education at school or add to their characters generally. We quite often sit above a marina and eat some food and watch the boats. But it happened to be on a short weekend break with my wife in Orkney overlooking some crystal clear blue waters that I decided that I was going to do it, which luckily came with the full backing of my wife, who's never got on well with sea travel on ships, but curiously did agree that having a boat would be an excellent thing for the family to have in our lives. So when I got home, I contacted the designer, who gave me a good quantity of his time actually before any money changed hands. In fact, I'd like to commend Mr. Tom Dunderdale of Campion Sail and Design for his pre-sales customer care in particular, in making sure that I wasn't wasting my money. In fact, he told me that most probably copies of the plans that he sells don't come with many questions asked afterwards in after sales. In fact, he never hears from them again. Either the plans are so good that no questions are required, or perhaps what's more likely is people don't actually build them. I find that a little sad. I bought the digital versions of the plans based on his advice, since everything needs to be scaled up anyway to be used. And having the digital ones means I can scale up a particular clip of a drawing and print that as big as I want when I need it. The drawings come in PDF format, and there's lots of comprehensive building notes. There's a lot to it. There are several variations detailed within the drawings to build different versions of the Apple 16, So it is worth spending a bit of time studying the drawings and forming a clear picture of what you want before diving in. Some wood was ordered and delivered to get me started, and I began by making the rudder. This was recommended in a book which Mr. Dunderdale suggested to me, but it also reflects some experience of my own from working with radio-controlled aircraft models from plans, and that really is to start with something small and get accustomed to the designer's style. As it happened, the book's angle was a little different, but ultimately arriving at the same thing. The book was saying that you're better to build all the small bits and pieces rather than fill your limited workspace with the big hull, which you cannot use until you've then found more space to make all the small bits and pieces to go with it. I saw some wisdom in that too. I'm quite lucky in that when I bought the property we live in now, that the big outbuilding with it, which was a big attraction at the time, had a nice quantity of Iroko School Science Laboratory bench tops stacked up at the back. These come complete with the cutouts for the little sinks and the Bunsen burner holes. You know what they look like. But there's lots of nice material around these. Iroko, if you don't know, is a nice tropical hardwood. Quite dark in colour, quite a reddish tone. But much more affordable than, like, say, teak. So we had a decent amount of that. I used some of this to begin the rudder headstock, which is made from an Iroko spacer block sandwiched between two pairs of 9mm plywood laminations. The tiller was likewise roughed out from some reclaimed Iroko, but that's going to wait for a while to have a bend steamed into it later on, once the headstock is mounted to the transom and the thwarts are in, so I can decide what the final ergonomics that I want need to look like. The folding rudder blade was constructed from laminated softwood strips with a leading and trailing edge in Iroko for some ding resistance, I suppose. The plans call for a through bolt to hinge the blade to the headstock, but I wanted to make sure this lasted a long time and it's maintainable. So I've used some oilite bushings. These are oil-impregnated sintered bronze top hat bushes, and these are pressed into the holes in the timber, and they give a good bearing surface for the stainless steel bolt between the rudder blade and the headstock to bear against. So that stops the wood from getting chewed up, and if the oilite bearings do wear out, I can just pop them out and replace them. So, and then the rudder was fiberglassed, as per the drawings. I suppose at this point I became a little bit self-conscious and weak, and I was fearful that people might not really take me seriously and believe I was building a boat until there was something boat-like that they could recognise. I was making Facebook page posts, but had quite minimal engagement from family and friends until exactly that there was something they could see. But in the meantime, I kind of caved in and decided to join the two pairs of 8-foot by 4-foot 6mm ply boards that would make the hull planks. In hindsight, I could and should have made a jig to do this with the router, but I did it with a power planer by hand. It worked okay, and the joints have proven to be perfectly strong and fit for purpose. You can pick the plywood boards up in the middle and flop them around. They're good joints. I mixed a little quantity of milled fibres into the epoxy to ensure any gaps were filled between the two halves of the scarf. Milled fibres are particles of glass fibre. They're a lot heavier than microballoons, which you might often see used in fiberglass. But unlike microballoons, milled fibres are structural. So while microballoons are good for surface finishing and things like that, which is ultimately a lighter material and it's easier to sand, they're really not what's needed here. As you can see, the joints were clamped between quite sturdy timbers, protected by polythene and allowed to cure. But let's come back to this picture now. It shows the 4 planks per side on the drawing and how they neatly nest quite tightly into the 16-foot by 4-foot rectangle which is formed by scarving these plywood planks. Now each plank has numerous points describing the top and the bottom edges of the planks, and each is measured from a single datum line with a different datum line per plank. So, and these have to be lofted onto the plywood, but the plans helpfully come with nice sets of coordinates for each plank, and these tell you where the datum lines are from the corners of the physical plywood board, and then give you reference coordinates from the datums. So it's very easy for a simple beginner like myself, or anyone else, I suppose, trying this. So simply all you have to do is measure along the datum line to the distance given on the table. That gives you your X position, and then you use your set square on the datum line and measure up to the Y position, and this gives you a single point on the plank's curve. You simply work your way down the table, mark off all the points, and then tap pins in at each point that you've marked and offer up a long wooden batten, and this will automatically show you the smoothest, or fairest in boat language, curve between all the points from stem to stern, and you simply trace that with your pen onto the wood. Now once you've got all 4 planks drawn in, and keep in mind that your datum line runs right through some of the planks that you've drawn before, and you're comfortable that you've lofted all the coordinates correctly, you can then either cut out one set and use these as templates for the second set, or as I did, carefully clamp both your boards together and set my circular saw to 12mm and cut both boards at the same time. So I cut around 2 to 3mm from the final lines with the circular saw, then planed down to the lines. Again, with the pairs of matching planks tightly clamped together to ensure they were identical. Being accurate's good, but it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. This construction technique is quite forgiving. The time came, quite quickly in fact, to fit a bolt through the top corner of the lowest planks to clamp the prow together, and then stitch along the keel edge with plenty tie wraps. It would turn out later actually I'd used about twice as many as I really needed that you see in this picture, but that's okay. These planks at the bottom, they undergo the most dramatic twist, so I propped them up upside down, like you can see, to encourage them to start to twist into the new shape, and then I went inside for a beer. The second plank went on, and it seemed like magic began to happen in the shape of the boat starting to form. You can see that I've parked some big wooden blocks in the front to help encourage that front to twist out. And all of a sudden, children begin to take an interest in the boat too, because there's something that they can see. The boat obviously began to adopt a shape of sorts, all of its own. As the planks were stitched in, it couldn't not adopt a shape, I suppose. But it wasn't until some internal frames were starting to be added that it became apparent how much further the planks had to go. To this point, I'd assembled the hull on the floor. And to be honest, I thought I'd made some mistakes in the lofting of the planks, because I simply could not get the gaps between the planks to close up at the bow. As it turned out, I made some trestles to get it off the floor, and I had to recruit some help to help me push frame 8 here right down into the bow while I fastened it from underneath with some more tie wraps. And of its own accord, the hull sagged into shape, and all the tie wraps in the bow that I'd been tensioning as tight as I dare, they all went slack, and the bow gaps disappeared all by themselves. It became quite clear I couldn't hang the last 2 planks on my own, so the children had to be recruited to help drill holes and fasten with tie wraps, and I pretty much held the weight of the plank. Interestingly, far from being at its best to date, this was where the hull felt at its flimsiest. The joins with the tie wraps were not structural, they were never intended to be, but this was when the full weight of the planks were bearing down on particularly some of the lower tie wraps down by the keel. But I have to say, adding some more frames internally helped this. The boat became quite stiff even before any glue was used. So I've been drawing the camber for the half-decked contours onto the tops of the frames as I've been marking them out, but I've been leaving the tops square for the time being, and this gives me nice square edges, so it's nice and easy to use a spirit level on different frames of the boat to ensure that I haven't twisted the hull before I go any step further. And here you can see the boat's providing some fun and an interactive way for my daughters to find some practical application for the maths they do in school. Here you can see my eldest lofting out frame 4, which is the last one that we fit in the boat before spot gluing the planks, which is the subject of the next video. That brings us pretty much up to date, so I want to thank you for watching, and if you're interested in seeing more, please like and subscribe to get this channel off the ground, and we'll see you in the next video.